The first thing I noticed that morning was the silence. Not the peaceful kind that comes after a night of camping, but the heavy, listening kind. The sort that feels like the woods themselves are holding their breath. The lake was glassy, catching the first pink shimmer of dawn, and a thin mist hovered above it, curling through the pines like smoke. I unzipped my tent and stretched, expecting to see my buddy Drew already brewing coffee. Instead, I froze. Not 10 feet from where I stood, fresh bear tracks circled the fire pit. Huge, distinct, pressed deep into the damp earth. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining things, but when I crouched closer, I could see the details. Long claws, a wide stride, and smaller prints trailing behind. Cubs. My stomach sank. I called out in a low voice, "Drew, Jess, wake up! We've got company." The tent stirred. Muffled groans followed, and soon the three of us stood around the prints in our boots and flannels, staring like we'd just discovered buried treasure and a ticking bomb all at once. Jess was the first to speak, her voice tight but calm. Black bear, I'd guess. Probably came through early. She'd done a few ranger programs before and knew her stuff. Drew, on the other hand, had that grin he always got when danger brushed too close for comfort. Well, guess we're not top of the food chain anymore. He tried to laugh, but it came out nervous and hollow. We went into quiet, deliberate motion, packing gear without the usual chatter, making sure every scrap of food was sealed tight. No sudden movements, no noise. I remembered every safety talk I'd ever heard. Don't run. Stay calm. Keep your distance. My hands shook as I rolled the tent, though whether from fear or the morning chill, I couldn't say. Somewhere in the trees, a jay screeched, and all three of us froze, hearts pounding. By the time the last of the mist burned off the lake, we had our packs ready and the fire drowned cold. The bear tracks led down toward the water, weaving between the root
lake's edge, our boots careful not to crunch through the gravel more than necessary. Every so often I glanced back, half expecting to see that black shape following in the distance. But all that trailed us were the slow curls of fog lifting from the water. Jess took the lead. She'd been through bear territory before, so we trusted her judgment. "We'll talk low," she murmured. "Enough so the bears know we're human, not prey." So, we made our way through the woods, speaking softly about ordinary things. How good the stars had looked last night. How the loon's calls had echoed over the lake. The words felt strange in the tension, but they helped steady our nerves. Drew, of course, couldn't resist throwing in a whisper about how he was ready to wrestle a cub if it came to it. Jess gave him a look sharp enough to cut rope. At a clearing near the trailhead, we stopped to take a final look back at what had been our campsite. The ring of flattened grass where our tents had stood, the half-burned logs of our fire pit. It already felt distant, like something from a dream. Crazy how quick the wilderness reminds you whose house this really is, I said, more to myself than anyone. Jess nodded. "Yeah, we're just visitors." We continued down the trail, and soon the terrain began to slope upward. The morning light grew stronger, filtering through the birches in gold streaks. Every scent felt sharper. The damp moss, the faint sweetness of pine needles warming in the sun, the earthy tang of decaying leaves. It was as though my senses had been turned up by what we'd just seen. Every sound made me look twice. A squirrel skittering, a breeze lifting through the branches. Drew tried to joke that he'd never felt so alive and terrified at the same time. By mid-morning, we reached a ridge overlooking the far side of the lake. From that height, we could see almost everything. The blue sweep of water, the thin line of smoke where our fire had been, and, down near the reeds, 3 dark shapes moving along the shoreline. The bear family again. The cubs tumbled over each other while their mother kept. Trail met the main access path. The tension that had wound through us all morning began to loosen. Drew dropped his pack onto the tailgate of Jess's old truck and let out a shaky laugh. "Well," he said, "that's the closest I've ever been to a wild bear that didn't involve a zoo fence." Jess smiled faintly, though her eyes were still scanning the tree line. "You know," she said, "we did everything right, but it still gives you a chill, doesn't it?" It did. Even standing there in the bright sun, the morning stillness clung to me. My pulse hadn't fully slowed yet, and I kept seeing those paw prints circling the campsite in my mind. I couldn't help thinking how close we'd been to stumbling out of our tents while the bears were still nearby. One wrong move, one rustle at the wrong time, and the story could have ended very differently. But instead, it had turned into something else. An encounter that would stay with us for years, not as fear, but as awe. Jess went over the checklist out loud. No food left behind? Trash double bagged? Gear accounted for? We all nodded. She reminded us to file the wildlife sighting report with the ranger station. They'll want to know there's a sow and cubs active along that shoreline. Her voice had its calm authority again, like she'd switched from camper to guide mode. I admired that about her, how she could move from fear to focus so easily. As we drove down the winding road toward the ranger post, Drew kept glancing out the window, half hoping for another glimpse of the bears. "You ever notice how after something like that," he said, "the woods look different? Like they're not just trees anymore. They're alive in ways you didn't see before." I knew exactly what he meant. The pine shadows, the ripple of light on the lake, even the buzz of insects along the roadside. All of it seemed sharper, more deliberate. At the ranger station, an older ranger with a grey beard listened as we explained what we'd seen. He nodded thoughtfully, jotting a few notes on a clipboard. "Happens every few weeks this time of year," he said. "Mama's teaching her cubs how to forage before the cold sets in. You did right by leaving calm and keeping your distance." He gave brush. The thought gave me a strange kind of peace. The wilderness wasn't meant to make us comfortable. It was meant to remind us we're small, temporary, and lucky to walk among things that are still wild. That evening, after checking in with the rangers and finding a new site farther down the valley, we set up camp again, this time with an almost ceremonial care. Every crumb was packed away, every cooking utensil scrubbed clean, every bag hung from the bear pole with military precision. Jess even joked that we could open a seminar called How Not to Get Eaten 101. The laughter came easier now, carrying over the quiet forest like the last bit of wind before dusk. The new site sat on a bluff overlooking a smaller lake, one that mirrored the pale pink sky as the sun sank behind the hills. We built a modest fire, the flames snapping politely, and took our seats around it with that contented silence that only comes after a long day of being both scared and grateful. Drew poked at the embers with a stick. "You know," he said, "I thought I'd be bragging about this when we got home. But it's weird. I don't feel like boasting at all. I just feel small, in a good way." Jess nodded. That's what the wilderness does if you listen long enough. It humbles you without saying a word. She stared into the flames for a moment, then added softly, "Most people go their whole lives without seeing a bear in the wild. We saw 3. and lived to tell about it. I leaned back on my elbows, watching the first stars shimmer through the canopy. "Yeah," I said. "And I think the best part is that they didn't even know we were scared. We just stayed quiet and let them live their morning. Maybe that's all you can really do out here. Coexist for a moment." The fire burned lower as night deepened. The sounds of the forest crept closer. The rhythmic croak of frogs, the whisper of leaves brushing in the wind, the distant call of a loon echoing across the lake. It was strange how comforting those noises felt now. Earlier, every sound had been a potential threat, a quiet reverence, the kind that only the wild can give. When I climbed into my sleeping bag, the night felt still but alive, every shadow and sound reminding me how small I truly was and how lucky. I drifted off, thinking that maybe fear and wonder aren't opposites at all. Maybe they're just two sides of the same heartbeat when you stand face to face with the raw, unfiltered world. The next morning dawned clear and gold, the kind of morning that feels like a gift after a restless night. A thin mist hung low on the lake again, and the air smelled faintly of pine sap and cool water. We moved slowly around camp, quiet but content. Jess brewed coffee over the coals, while Drew hummed tunelessly, rolling his sleeping bag tighter than necessary. The adrenaline of the previous day had faded into something steadier. Respect. Maybe even gratitude. We weren't in a hurry to leave, but we knew we would carry that moment with us long after we drove away. As we packed, I found myself pausing often to look around. The light slanting through the trees, the sparkle of dew on the grass, even the lazy drift of smoke from our dying fire. All of it felt sharper, more vivid. The forest hadn't changed overnight. We had. Fear has a way of carving space inside you, and awe fills it up again, leaving you bigger than before. When the truck was loaded, Jess took one last sweep of the site, making sure we left nothing behind but footprints. "No trace," she said softly, almost to herself. "They deserve their home just as it is." Drew grinned, hefting his pack. "Yeah, and I'd rather not have a bear remembering my scent next time." His grin widened when Jess rolled her eyes, but beneath the humour, there was something else in his voice. Respect, born from experience. The drive out wound along the lake's curve, sunlight glinting off the water like a trail of molten silver. At one bend, we pulled over where the trees opened to a broad view. Down near the far shore, barely visible, 3 dark figures moved along the reeds. The mother bear and her cubs. We stood by the truck, leaning on the hood, watching in silence through the branches, each turn taking us farther from the lake, but closer to something that felt like understanding. Jess hummed softly, and Drew leaned back with his cap pulled low. The corners of his mouth turned up in a small, satisfied smile. As for me, I watched the forest pass by and thought about the prints we'd found that morning, the perfect, silent marks in the mud. They'd been erased by now, washed away by dew and time, but their meaning stayed. Out there, life moves on, wild and free, whether we witness it or not. And maybe that's the real gift of the wilderness. It reminds you how big the world truly is, and how lucky you are just to walk in it for a while.